Oshkosh Board of Education voted tonight during its meeting to hire 2 new administrators to the district.
However, both of those candidates have been the focus of discussions on social media. Samantha Cavalli attended the meeting and has more on what was concerning parents throughout the district.
This is my 7th year on the board, and I cannot recall a time when 2 candidates put forth by administration has been so deeply scrutinized.
Wednesday, following a lengthy discussion at the Oshkosh Board of Education meeting, the board voted 6-1 to approve 2 new members of the administration. Dr. Samuel Coleman will be the district's new assistant superintendent, and Dr. Anthony Miller Jr., the district's first director of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Board member Kelly DeWitt, who casted the only no vote, asked the board to pull these agenda items so the board could have an open discussion.
And I think that, we need to be aware and remember that we're here solely because of our constituents and our community.
On social media, the hirings of these 2 people, especially Dr. Coleman, broke out regarding a former accusation made in 2022 at his former school district, Shorewood. Superintendent Dr. Brian Davis said he and Coleman used to work together prior to him coming to Oshkosh.
The concerns, again, were, for me, were taken seriously. We're inconsistent from what I know from his performance in working with him. So that allowed me to have an opportunity to, 1, talk with him, and 2, probably most importantly, be able to dig down with his references.
As for Dr. Miller, Davis said while he doesn't have a teaching or administrative license to supervise principals, his experience at UW-Oshkosh and Fox Valley Tech has shown his commitment to education and bring access to education to all students.
And again, I believe that the translation from his work at Fox Valley Tech in this realm is going to be really important. Understanding barriers and how do you remove barriers in an educational setting. Being able to translate that to a K-12 setting, I think will be an easy translation for him.
The new hire's first day is July 5th. Samantha Cavalli, Action 2 News, Oshkosh.